June 19th, 1944, 05:42 hours, 150 miles west of Guam, Philippines Sea. The radar screen glowed green in the darkened belly of our TBM Avenger, its circular displays showing something that made my blood run cold. Contacts. Dozens of them, maybe 100, all moving east at 180 knots, heading straight toward Task Force 58 and the 15 American aircraft carriers that represented our entire Pacific striking power. My name is Lieutenant Commander Robert Radar Bob Henderson, United States Navy, and I was flying what the Japanese considered the most absurd waste of an aircraft in modern warfare. A perfectly good torpedo bomber stripped of its weapons and loaded instead with 500 pounds of electronic equipment that could see for 150 miles in any direction. The AN-APS-4 radar set humming beneath my seat was primitive by any measure, temperamental, prone to failure, and absolutely critical to everything we were about to do. The Japanese called pilots like me blind men with machines, mocking our reliance on technology instead of the warrior's instinct and sharp eyes that had made their naval aviators legendary. Their philosophy was simple. A true pilot needed nothing but his aircraft, his skill, and his courage. Radar was a crutch for inferior pilots who couldn't trust their own abilities. They were about to learn that the pilot who could see 150 miles had an insurmountable advantage over the pilot who could only see 5. "Smokey, you seeing this?" I keyed the intercom to my radar operator, Aviation Radio Man First Class James Smokey Sullivan, hunched over his own scope in the rear compartment. "Got him, Skipper. I count 68 distinct contacts. No, wait, 72. They're in formation. Looks like 4 groups. Altitude varying between 18,000 and 25,000 feet. Range 145 miles. Closing at 180 knots. 72 contacts meant at least 150 aircraft. Our radar could only distinguish separate formations, not individual planes flying close together. This was the Japanese strike force we'd been waiting for, the massed carrier attack that would determine control of the Pacific. And we could see them coming from 150 miles away, long before their best lookouts could spot our fleet. I grabbed my radio transmitter. "Blue Jacket, this is Big Eye-1, raid warning. Many bogies bearing 270, range 145 miles, altitude 18 to 25,000 feet, speed 180 knots, headed your way. Estimate raid force at 150 plus aircraft. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." The response came immediately from Lieutenant Commander David McCampbell, Air Group Commander aboard USS Essex, and the officer coordinating fighter direction for the entire task force. "Big Eye-1, Blue Jacket confirms your contact. Vector all fighters to intercept. This is what we've been waiting for." Through my headset, I heard the carefully controlled chaos of American fighter direction at its peak. Carriers aboard the carriers were already vectoring Hellcats toward the incoming raid, but they were doing it blind. Their shipboard radars could see maybe 60 miles on a good day, and they couldn't differentiate altitude or precise formation details. They knew something was coming, but they didn't know what or exactly where. I knew. My radar could see everything: altitude, heading, speed, how the formations were organized, even estimate their size based on the radar return strength. And most importantly, I could guide our fighters to intercept positions with precision the Japanese couldn't imagine. "Blue Jacket, Big Eye-1, recommend Vector 300 for intercept groups. Bogies are in 4 distinct formations. Lead formation at 270, 25,000 feet. Second formation at 265, 22,000 feet. Third at 275, 18,000 feet. Fourth trailing at 280, 20,000 feet. They're stacked in altitude and staggered in bearing. Looks like they're planning a coordinated attack from multiple directions." "Big Eye-1, Blue Jacket copies. Vectoring Hellcat divisions to intercept each formation. Keep me updated on their position every 2 minutes." This was it. This was why the Navy had spent millions developing airborne early warning radar, why they'd stripped weapons from perfectly good torpedo bombers to carry electronics instead, why they'd trained pilots like me to read radar screens instead of dropping torpedoes. We were about to prove that information dominance was more valuable than firepower, that the side that could see first would win before the shooting even started. The Japanese were flying blind into a trap they couldn't see, guided by their courage and warrior spirit directly into the killing ground we'd prepared with mathematics and electronics. The concept of airborne early warning radar had emerged from desperation. In 1942, Japanese carrier strikes had repeatedly achieved tactical surprise because American ships couldn't see far enough to intercept attackers before they reached launch range. Shipboard radar of 1942 could detect aircraft at maybe 40 miles, good enough for anti-aircraft defense, but useless for vectoring fighters to intercept raids before they threatened the fleet. The solution seemed obvious. Put the radar in an aircraft, get it up high where it could see farther, use it to detect incoming raids, and direct fighters to intercept them. Simple concept, incredibly difficult execution. The AN-APS-4 radar set weighed almost 500 pounds and consumed so much power it required its own generator. It was temperamental. Humidity could kill it, vibration could knock it out of alignment, and the vacuum tubes it depended on had the unfortunate tendency to fail at exactly the wrong moment. Mounting it in an aircraft meant redesigning weight distribution, routing cooling air to prevent overheating, and training operators to interpret the fuzzy green blobs on the radar screen as actual aircraft formations. Worse, the concept violated every principle of naval aviation that carrier pilots held sacred. Aircraft were for attacking, dropping bombs, launching torpedoes, strafing enemy positions. Using a perfectly good torpedo bomber as a flying radar platform meant removing its weapons, dedicating an entire aircraft and crew to doing something that contributed nothing directly to sinking enemy ships.
The Japanese thought we were insane. Their doctrine emphasized offensive action above all else. Every aircraft should be loaded with the maximum weapons it could carry. Every pilot should be focused on attacking, not on defensive reconnaissance. The idea of flying an unarmed aircraft whose only purpose was to look at radar screens struck them as the ultimate expression of American weakness, too afraid to fight directly, hiding behind technology, using machines to compensate for lack of warrior spirit. Captain Minoru Genda, the tactical genius who'd planned Pearl Harbor and now served as air operations officer for Japan's mobile fleet, had reviewed intelligence reports about American radar-equipped aircraft and dismissed them with contempt. The Americans build observers when they should build attackers. They watch when they should strike. This defensive mentality guarantees their defeat. If he was watching the radar screen in my TBM Avenger, he might have revised that assessment. Bogies now at 130 miles, Smokey reported. Maintaining course and speed. They have no idea we're tracking them. That was the beautiful thing about radar. It was passive detection from the Japanese perspective. They couldn't see the radio waves my radar was transmitting, couldn't detect that they were being tracked, couldn't know that every maneuver they made was being plotted on screens 130 miles away. To them, they were flying a perfectly executed approach, maintaining radio silence, using cloud cover for concealment, doing everything their doctrine said would guarantee surprise. Meanwhile, I was updating Blue Jacket every 2 minutes with their exact position, altitude, and heading. American fighters were climbing to intercept altitude, positioning themselves up-sun from the approaching Japanese formations, spreading out to cover all 4 attack groups. The Japanese were flying into a reception committee that knew exactly where they were, exactly when they'd arrive, and exactly how to position for maximum killing efficiency. Blue Jacket, Big I-1, bogies at 120 miles. Our fighters should have radar contact within 10 minutes. Recommend they climb to Angels 30, maintain position at 290, wait for the Japanese to come to them. Big I-1, Blue Jacket copies. Hellcat divisions are climbing to Angels 30, standing by for intercept. I checked my fuel gauge. 3 hours remaining before I'd need to return to the carrier. Plenty of time to watch this entire engagement unfold on my radar screen, to see the mathematical precision of American fighter direction destroy a Japanese strike force that probably spent weeks training for this mission. At 06:14 hours, the geometry converged. The lead Japanese formation, 69 aircraft according to their combat reports, ran headlong into 40 Hellcats that had been positioned exactly where my radar said they should be. The contact appeared on my scope as the two formations merged, a blob of radar returns that obscured individual aircraft but told me everything I needed to know. The ambush had been sprung perfectly. Blue Jacket, Big Eye 1, intercept confirmed. I show our fighters engaging lead bogey formation. Multiple bandits breaking off, some turning back west, some continuing east. Second bogey formation is now at 100 miles, maintaining course. They don't know what's happening to their lead elements. Big Eye 1, Blue Jacket copies, vectoring additional Hellcats to engage second formation. We're going to kill them all. Through my headset, I could hear fragments of combat communications. Hellcat pilots reporting kills, calling out targets, coordinating attacks. The Japanese had flown into a meat grinder, their carefully planned, coordinated attack shredded before they'd even seen American ships. Over the next 3 hours, my radar screen told the story of the most one-sided air battle in naval history. The Japanese launched 4 waves totaling 373 aircraft. My radar tracked every single one from the moment they came within detection range. American fighter directors used my information to position Hellcats for optimal intercepts. The Japanese flew brave, determined, and completely blind into ambush after ambush after ambush. The numbers would later be called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. 346 Japanese carrier aircraft destroyed, plus 50 land-based aircraft from Guam. American losses, 30 aircraft, most from operational accidents rather than combat. Kill ratio, 12-1. The entire Japanese carrier air force, rebuilt after Midway at enormous cost, had been annihilated in a single day.
And it had all started with a radar screen in an unarmed torpedo bomber that the Japanese thought was the stupidest waste of an aircraft they'd ever seen. The TBM Avenger I flew that day was an ugly, ungainly beast that handled like a truck and wallowed through the air with all the grace of a flying dump truck. The Japanese Zero pilots who'd seen them during early war engagements had mocked them. Too slow, too heavy, too clumsy. An easy target for nimble fighters. What those Zero pilots hadn't known was that some of those ugly Avengers carried equipment that made them more valuable than entire squadrons of fighters. The AN/APS-4 radar installation required gutting the Avenger's bomb bay. The torpedo had to go. The bomb racks had to go. In their place went the radar transmitter, the receiver, the display scopes, the power generators, the cooling systems, and hundreds of pounds of ancillary equipment. The aircraft that emerged was designated TBM-3W, the W standing for warning, though we just called them Big Eyes. The radar itself was a marvel of 1944 technology, which meant it was primitive by modern standards, but revolutionary for its time. The system transmitted pulses of radio energy at 515 megacycles, then listened for echoes bouncing back from metal objects like aircraft. The time delay between transmission and echo return indicated distance. The direction the antenna was pointing indicated bearing. Simple physics, complex engineering. The display was a circular cathode ray tube showing my aircraft at the center, with contacts appearing as bright blips on the green screen. Range rings at 20-mile intervals helped estimate distance. A rotating antenna sweep left a fading trail that showed where we'd already scanned. It looked like something from a science fiction movie, which, to most pilots in 1944, it might as well have been.
Operating the system required skills that had nothing to do with traditional aviation. I had to interpret radar returns, distinguish real aircraft from weather, from sea clutter, from electromagnetic interference. I had to track multiple formations simultaneously, estimate altitude based on return strength, project intercept geometry in 3 dimensions while my own aircraft was in motion. Most importantly, I had to communicate all this information to fighter directors who would use it to vector Hellcats to intercept positions. That meant maintaining precise navigation, continuous radio communication, accurate position reporting, and cool nerves while flying an unarmed aircraft that would be helpless if any Japanese fighters found me. The Japanese never understood what we were doing. Their doctrine had no concept of airborne early warning. Their radar technology lagged years behind American developments. Even if they had captured one of our radar-equipped Avengers intact, which they never did, they lacked the industrial capacity to produce the components in meaningful quantities. So they kept launching attacks using traditional methods: scouts to locate the enemy fleet, strike forces navigating by dead reckoning, hoping to achieve surprise through speed and stealth. And we kept detecting them from 150 miles away, vectoring fighters to perfect intercept positions, destroying them before they could threaten our ships. It was the definition of asymmetric warfare. One side fighting with eyes that could see beyond the horizon, the other side blind beyond visual range and doomed by their inability to adapt. June 20th, 1944, 1920 hours, 275 miles northwest of Guam. The day after the Turkey Shoot, Admiral Mark Mitcher made a decision that would become legendary in naval aviation history. He would launch a strike against the retreating Japanese fleet at extreme range, knowing his aircraft would have to return after dark, knowing that many pilots lacked night landing experience, accepting that he might lose more aircraft to operational accidents than to enemy action. My role was to provide homing guidance for the returning strike aircraft. At 1945 hours, I was orbiting 60 miles ahead of the task force, my radar tracking both our outbound strike aircraft and monitoring for any Japanese aircraft that might launch a counterattack. The sun was setting, turning the Pacific into liquid gold, and I knew that in 90 minutes it would be pitch black, no moon, no horizon reference, just ocean and darkness.
Big I-1, this is Strike Leader. Commander David McCampbell's voice crackled through my headset. We've hit the Japanese fleet, sank a couple carriers, damaged others, but we're bingo fuel and losing daylight fast. Need you to guide us home. Bingo fuel, the point where you have just enough gas to make it back to base, with no margin for error, no allowance for getting lost, no second chances. And night landing on a carrier was the most dangerous evolution in naval aviation, even for experienced pilots. For aviators who'd never done it, who were exhausted from combat, who were flying on fumes, it would be a nightmare. Strike Leader, Big I-1 copies. I have you on radar bearing 135, range 180 miles. Come left to heading 090. That will take you directly to the task force. Stay on that heading, and I'll update you every 5 miles. For the next 90 minutes, I became the lifeline for 209 aircraft trying to find their carriers in the darkness. My radar could see them, individual formations, scattered groups, even single aircraft limping home on failing engines. I vectored them toward the fleet, called out corrections when they drifted off course, coordinated with the carriers as they turned on their lights in violation of blackout regulations to help pilots find the landing pattern. Aircraft started splashing when they ran out of fuel. I could see them on my radar. Contacts that simply disappeared. Pilots who'd fought their way through Japanese defenses only to die in the ocean because they couldn't find home in the darkness. Each disappearing blip was an aircraft gone, a crew lost, Americans who'd won the battle but lost their lives in the aftermath. Big I-1, this is Blue Jacket.
We're recovering aircraft as fast as we can. Keep vectoring them in. We'll get as many as possible." By 21:45 hours, most of the strike force had recovered. Final count, 80 aircraft lost. But most crews survived, rescued by destroyers that my radar had vectored to ditching positions. Without radar guidance, without my ability to track every aircraft and direct them toward the carriers, losses would have been catastrophic. Admiral Mitscher would later say, "The radar-equipped Avengers saved more lives that night than fighters saved during the day." The Japanese had no equivalent capability. When their strike aircraft got lost, which happened frequently given their primitive navigation equipment, they simply vanished. No radar to track them, no homing guidance to bring them back, no rescue coordination for crews that ditched. Their pilots were expected to find their carriers by skill and determination, and when that failed, they died. It was another manifestation of the same philosophy. Japanese naval doctrine valued individual prowess over systematic support. American doctrine used technology to bring everyone home alive. The results spoke for themselves. The psychological impact of radar-directed fighter interception on Japanese naval aviation was devastating and complete. After the Marianas Turkey Shoot, surviving Japanese pilots reported encountering American fighters that seemed to know exactly where they'd be, that appeared from perfect ambush positions, that intercepted them with uncanny accuracy despite flying through clouds and poor visibility. Some attributed it to American signals intelligence. Perhaps the U.S. had broken Japanese codes and was reading their attack orders. Others believed American submarines were somehow tracking Japanese carriers and radioing positions to the fleet. A few suggested supernatural explanations, American pilots possessed by vengeful spirits who could see through normal obstacles. None of them guessed the truth, that a handful of ungainly torpedo bombers carrying radar equipment were tracking every Japanese aircraft from the moment they launched and directing American fighters to perfect intercept positions. The Japanese Navy never developed effective airborne early warning because they never understood its value. Their entire naval aviation philosophy was built around offensive striking power. Every aircraft should contribute directly to sinking enemy ships. Dedicating valuable aircraft and pilots to defensive reconnaissance violated fundamental principles. This philosophical blindness cost them everything. By July 1944, the rebuilt Japanese carrier air force had been destroyed. Not in carrier-to-carrier duels, not through attrition over months of fighting, but in a single day when American radar-directed fighters massacred formations that flew blind into perfectly positioned ambushes. The mobile fleet still had carriers, but it no longer had the experienced pilots and coordinated air groups needed to use them effectively. Japan's carrier warfare capability had been reduced to near zero, and a significant factor was their enemies' use of a technology they'd dismissed as cowardly and ineffective. October 24, 1944, 0615 hours, east of San Bernardo Strait, Philippines. 5 months after the Marianas, I was flying Big Eye missions off the Philippines during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval engagement in history, where the Japanese threw everything they had left in a desperate attempt to destroy American amphibious forces at Leyte. My radar screen showed something that made my heart skip. 4 large contacts, bearing 240 degrees, range 85 miles, speed 20 knots. Not aircraft, these were moving too slowly, and the radar returns were huge. These were ships, big ships, probably battleships or heavy cruisers. Blue Jacket, this is Big Eye 1, surface contact. 4 large vessels bearing 240, range 85 miles, speed 20 knots, heading towards San Bernardo Strait. Possible Japanese surface action group.
The response was immediate and alarmed. Big I-1, confirmed surface contact. 4 large vessels? Confirmed, Blue Jacket. Radar returns consistent with capital ships. They're headed directly toward our invasion beaches.
What I'd found was Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force, 4 battleships, including the super battleship Yamato, 6 heavy cruisers, and 11 destroyers. This was Japan's most powerful surface fleet, and it was about to emerge through San Bernardino Strait into Leyte Gulf, where it could massacre American transport ships and destroy the invasion. Except they'd been spotted 85 miles away by a radar-equipped Avenger, giving American forces hours to prepare a response. Over the next 6 hours, my radar tracked center forces' approach, while American carrier aircraft launched repeated strikes. I vectored attack aircraft to the Japanese fleet, provided damage assessment as ships slowed or fell out of formation, coordinated search patterns when Japanese ships tried to hide in rain squalls. The Japanese didn't know I was there. They couldn't detect my radar transmissions. They probably thought American aircraft were finding them through visual search, spotting their wakes, their masts, their smoke. They had no conception that a single unarmed aircraft with electronic equipment was orchestrating the entire American air response. Kurita's center force turned back before reaching Leyte Gulf, having lost 3 heavy cruisers and taken severe damage to other ships. American airstrikes had savaged them, and those strikes had been guided by my radar. The Japanese never reached the invasion beaches, never got the opportunity to use their battleships' massive guns against defenseless transports. A single radar-equipped Avenger had prevented what couldn't have been a catastrophic defeat for American amphibious forces. The final evolution of airborne early warning came in early 1945 when the Navy began facing kamikaze attacks. These suicide aircraft approached at low altitude, making them difficult to detect with shipboard radar until they were dangerously close. American ships needed earlier warning, time to launch fighters, time to prepare defenses, time to maneuver. The solution was obvious: more Big Eye aircraft flying closer to likely Japanese approach routes, detecting kamikazes at maximum range, and vectoring combat air patrol to intercept them before they could threaten the fleet. By March 1945, during the Okinawa campaign, the Navy had dedicated AEW, Airborne Early Warning, stations operating continuously. We flew in relays, maintaining radar coverage 24 hours a day, 360 degrees around the fleet. Every Japanese aircraft that approached was detected, tracked, and intercepted, usually by radar-vectored night fighters that the enemy never saw coming. The kamikaze threat, terrifying as it was, became manageable because we could see the attackers long before they reached our ships. Japanese suicide pilots flying their final missions found themselves intercepted by American fighters that seemed to know exactly where they'd be, that appeared from nowhere, that shot them down before they could reach their targets. Some kamikaze pilots must have died wondering how the Americans always knew they were coming. The answer was simple: radar. Unglamorous, unheroic, mocked by the Japanese as a crutch for inferior warriors, but more effective than any amount of bravery or skill could overcome. August 15, 1945, 1340 hours, east of Tokyo Bay. The war ended with me on a radar picket station, orbiting 50 miles ahead of the invasion fleet that would never need to land. My radar screen was quiet. No Japanese aircraft, no surface contacts, just empty ocean and the faint returns from American ships behind me. 3 years earlier, the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor with carrier aircraft that achieved complete tactical surprise because American radar detection was primitive and poorly coordinated. They'd sunk battleships, destroyed aircraft, killed thousands of Americans, all because they could see us and we couldn't see them. Now, in August 1945, American airborne radar could detect any aircraft within 150 miles, track it precisely, vector fighters to perfect intercept positions, and destroy it before it threatened our forces. The side that had achieved tactical surprise in 1941 through superior planning and execution had been ground down by an enemy with superior technology and systematic application of information dominance. Japan's naval aviation had been destroyed not primarily through better aircraft or braver pilots, but through American radar that let us see every attack coming and position our forces for optimal response. The Japanese had mocked our reliance on electronics, called us weak for hiding behind machines, laughed at pilots like me who flew unarmed aircraft loaded with radar equipment instead of bombs and torpedoes. They'd learned, too late, at terrible cost, that the warrior who could see 150 miles would always defeat the warrior who could only see 5, no matter how brave or skilled the blind warrior might be.
The statistics of American airborne early warning radar employment during World War II tell a story of revolutionary capability deployed with systematic efficiency. TBM-3W Avenger production. 273 aircraft converted to AEW configuration, each carrying AN/APS-4 radar equipment that weighed 485 pounds and cost $82,000, more than twice the cost of a standard Avenger. Detection range, maximum 150 miles for large formations, 100 miles for small groups, 60 miles for individual aircraft, compared to 40 miles for shipboard radar and 5 to 10 miles for visual detection. Philippine Sea, June 19th to 20th, 1944. AEW aircraft tracked 373 Japanese aircraft from launch until intercept, enabling American fighters to achieve 12-to-1 kill ratio. Japanese losses, 346 carrier aircraft destroyed. American losses, 30 aircraft, mostly from operational causes. Leyte Gulf, October 24th to 26th, 1944. AEW aircraft provided first detection of all 3 Japanese surface action groups, giving American forces 3 to 8 hours warning before enemy fleets arrived within striking distance. Okinawa Campaign, April-June 1945. AEW aircraft maintained continuous radar coverage, detecting 95% of kamikaze attacks before they reached the fleet. Of 1,900 kamikaze sorties launched, only 14% reached their targets, largely because radar-vectored fighters intercepted them at distance. Total AEW flight hours, over 47,000 hours logged by radar-equipped aircraft from June 1944 through August 1945. Aircraft detected and tracked, estimated 12,000-plus Japanese aircraft tracked from launch to intercept or until they returned to base. Lives saved? Incalculable. But post-war analysis estimated AEW reduced American ship losses by 60 to 70% compared to what would have occurred without early warning. The Japanese never developed equivalent capability. By war's end, they still relied on visual scouting and radio direction finding for early warning, the same methods they'd used at Pearl Harbor. Their failure to understand the value of airborne radar reconnaissance, or their inability to develop the technology even if they'd understood it, left them fighting blind against an enemy that could see everything. I flew my last combat mission on August 14, 1945, one day before the surrender. My radar screen showed 2 Japanese aircraft approaching from the north, probably reconnaissance planes checking American fleet positions. I vectored night fighters to intercept, watched on my scope as the 2 contacts merged and then one disappeared. The last Japanese aircraft I tracked was shot down by an American pilot who never saw it visually, guided to the intercept entirely by radar vectors I provided.
The pilot who made the kill probably never knew there was a guy in an Avenger 60 miles away watching the whole thing on a green screen, calling out corrections until the geometry converged and his bullets found their target. That was the nature of radar warfare: systematic, impersonal, effective. The Japanese had called us cowards for fighting this way, said we lacked the warrior spirit to engage in honest combat. They preferred the way of the samurai: individual skill, courage in the face of death, victory through superior spirit. We preferred the way of the engineer: systematic detection, mathematical precision, and overwhelming information superiority. And our way had won. Post-war interviews with surviving Japanese naval aviators revealed complete incomprehension of American radar capabilities. Many believed we'd developed psychic abilities or supernatural detection methods. The concept that radio waves could detect aircraft at 150 miles, that electronic equipment could track hundreds of contacts simultaneously, that unarmed reconnaissance aircraft could orchestrate entire air battles, it seemed like fantasy. Captain Minoru Genda, the brilliant tactician who dismissed American AEW aircraft as defensive weakness, survived the war and later became Chief of Staff of Japan's Air Self-Defense Force. In a 1965 interview, he admitted, "We never understood American radar. We knew it had it. We knew it was better than ours, but we didn't comprehend how it changed the fundamental nature of naval warfare. By the time we realized what we were facing, we'd lost our entire carrier air force." He was asked specifically about the TBM-3W Avenger, the aircraft the Japanese had mocked as wasted striking power. His response? "Those unarmed aircraft defeated us more thoroughly than all your fighters and bombers combined. They gave you eyes that could see beyond our horizon. In naval warfare, the side that sees first wins. You saw first every single time. We never had a chance." The legacy of World War II airborne early warning extends directly to modern warfare. Every AWACS aircraft, every E-2 Hawkeye, every airborne radar platform deployed by every modern military traces its lineage to those ugly TBM Avengers with radar equipment crammed into their bomb bays. The concept proven in 1944 that information dominance matters more than striking power, that seeing the enemy first provides overwhelming tactical advantage, that systematic detection and coordinated response defeat individual skill, has become fundamental to modern military doctrine. The U.S. Navy learned this lesson so thoroughly that by the 1950s, every carrier air group included dedicated AEW aircraft as standard equipment. The E-1 Tracer, then the E-2 Hawkeye, carried increasingly sophisticated radar that could see farther, track more targets, coordinate more complex intercepts. Modern carrier operations are unthinkable without AEW support. The idea that struck the Japanese as absurd in 1943, dedicating valuable aircraft to doing nothing but watching radar screens, has become so fundamental that no navy operates carriers without it. The Japanese philosophy of offensive striking power, of warrior spirit, of individual prowess defeating systematic capability had seemed invincible in 1941 when their carriers appeared off Hawaii and caught us completely by surprise. By 1944, that philosophy lay in ruins, destroyed by an enemy that valued information over valor, systematic coordination over individual heroics, and electronic detection over visual scouting.
I came home in September 1945, the war over, my service complete. I'd flown 247 combat missions in an unarmed aircraft, orbiting for hours while watching dots on a radar screen, vectoring fighters to intercepts, guiding lost pilots home,
doing work that felt more like traffic control than combat aviation. The Navy awarded me the Distinguished Flying Cross, though I'd never fired a shot in anger. The citation read, "For extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight as pilot of a radar-equipped aircraft. Lieutenant Commander Henderson's precise navigation and expert radar interpretation enabled the destruction of numerous enemy aircraft and saved countless American lives." It was accurate, but it missed the larger truth. I hadn't destroyed enemy aircraft through skill or courage. I destroyed them through systematic application of superior technology. I'd turned air combat from an art into a science, from a test of individual prowess into a mathematical exercise in geometry and vectors. The Japanese had laughed at pilots like me, called us cowards hiding behind machines. They'd believed true warriors needed nothing but skill and spirit. And that belief, that contempt for technology, that faith in individual prowess over systematic capability had cost them everything. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, where 346 Japanese carrier aircraft were destroyed in a single day, happened because I and pilots like me could see them coming from 150 miles away and position American fighters for perfect ambushes. Those Japanese pilots flew bravely, attacked courageously, and died without ever understanding that they had been tracked from the moment they launched and vectored into killing zones by an enemy they never saw. Leyte Gulf, where the largest naval battle in history ended in decisive American victory, turned partly on AEW aircraft detecting Japanese surface forces hours before they could threaten our invasion fleet. Those early warnings gave us time to prepare, time to launch strikes, time to blunt attacks that might have changed the battle's outcome. Okinawa, where kamikaze attacks that should have devastated our fleet were intercepted and destroyed before they could reach their targets, succeeded because AEW aircraft maintained continuous radar coverage and vectored fighters to intercept suicide planes that approached at low altitude through darkness and bad weather. None of those victories came from superior courage or skill. They came from superior information, from electronic eyes that could see beyond the horizon, from systematic coordination that turned individual aircraft into components of a larger machine. The Japanese had mocked the clumsy American radar planes, called them waste of striking power, laughed at pilots who flew unarmed aircraft. Those clumsy radar planes had guided 400 fighters to destroy Japan's entire naval air force in a single day, had coordinated the air response that crushed Japan's last offensive at Leyte Gulf, had orchestrated the defense that made kamikaze attacks statistically ineffective. The Japanese pilots had been brave, skilled, determined warriors who flew inferior aircraft with limited support against an enemy that could see everything they did and respond with overwhelming force. Their courage was never in question, but courage without information was just another form of blindness, and the blind warrior will always lose to the sighted one, no matter how brave or skilled the blind man might be. That was the lesson of World War II naval aviation. In modern warfare, the side that sees first wins, regardless of any other factor. The Japanese had learned it too late, at catastrophic cost. The American military learned it permanently and built every subsequent doctrine around information dominance as the foundation of successful operations. 75 years later, that lesson remains valid. Modern warfare is fought with AWACS aircraft, satellite surveillance, drone reconnaissance, networked sensors that create comprehensive battlefield awareness. Every soldier carries a radio. Every vehicle has a GPS. Every commander can see the entire tactical picture on a digital display. It all started with a handful of TBM Avengers carrying primitive radar equipment flown by pilots who understood that seeing 150 miles mattered more than carrying bombs, that information dominance would determine victory more surely than firepower or courage. The Japanese pilots who laughed at those clumsy radar planes learned their mistake at the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, where systematic information superiority destroyed their entire carrier air force in a single day. They learned it too late, and by the time they understood what they were facing, the war was already lost.